Kate Morrison had always been the kind of person who found meaning in small things. The silver bracelet wrapped around her wrist wasn't expensive or fancy, but it carried the weight of her entire world. Her grandmother had given it to her on her 16th birthday, just 3 months before cancer took her away. The bracelet was simple, with tiny charms that told the story of their relationship. A small book for all the stories they shared, a heart for the love that never faded, and a star because her grandmother always said Kate would shine bright in this world. Now, at 25, Kate worked as a children's librarian in the small town of Millbrook. Every morning she would touch the bracelet before starting her day, feeling connected to the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 8 years old. The library was her sanctuary, filled with the smell of old books and the laughter of children who came for story time every Tuesday and Thursday. William Chen had recently moved to Millbrook to take over his uncle's coffee shop. Being there, he was quiet by nature, someone who preferred listening to talking, watching to being watched. At 30, he had left behind a successful but soul-crushing corporate job in the city, choosing instead to find peace in the simple rhythm of making coffee and serving the community. The shop was directly across from the library, and every morning William would see Kate walking to work, her bracelet catching the sunlight as she pushed open the heavy library doors. There was something about her that made William pause in his morning routine. Maybe it was the way she always stopped to pet Mrs. Henderson's old golden retriever, or how she would smile at the children racing past on their way to school. She had a gentleness about her that reminded him why he had left the harsh world of business behind. Yet despite seeing her every day for 3 months, William had never found the courage to introduce himself. Kate had noticed the new coffee shop owner too. Sometimes, during her lunch break, she would glance across the street and see him through the window, carefully preparing drinks with a concentration that suggested he cared deeply about his craft. There was a sadness in his eyes that she recognized, the kind that came from loss or disappointment. She had wanted to visit his shop, but something always held her back. Maybe it was the fear of disrupting the peaceful routine she had built, or perhaps it was the way he seemed so focused on his work that she didn't want to intrude. The town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but somehow Kate and William existed in parallel circles that never quite intersected. She would see him at the grocery store on Sunday mornings, always buying ingredients that suggested he cooked for one. He would notice her at the farmer's market, carefully selecting books from the used bookstall. Always fiction, always stories about people finding their way home. One particularly busy Thursday morning, Kate was rushing to set up for the children's story time. The autumn air was crisp and she had wrapped her grandmother's shawl around her shoulders, the one that perfectly matched her bracelet. She was carrying a stack of picture books about friendship and a bag full of craft supplies for the activity she had planned. The children would be arriving soon, and she wanted everything to be perfect. As she hurried across the street, balancing everything in her arms, Kate didn't notice that the clasp on her bracelet had been gradually loosening over the past few weeks. The metal had worn thin from years of daily wear, and the small mechanism that kept it secure was finally giving way. She was halfway across the intersection when she felt something slip from her wrist. The bracelet hit the asphalt with a soft tinkling sound, and Kate watched in horror as it broke apart. The charms scattered across the street like tiny pieces of her heart, rolling toward the storm drain, disappearing under parked cars. The chain itself lay broken in 2 pieces, no longer the complete circle that had surrounded her wrist for nearly 10 years. Kate dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the street, not caring about the cars that would need to go around her, not thinking about the story time that would start in 15 minutes. All she could think about was that her last connection to her grandmother was scattered across the cold pavement, possibly lost forever. Tears started flowing before she could stop them, and she began frantically searching for the charms, her books forgotten beside her. William had been watching from his shop window, as he did every morning when he saw Kate suddenly stop in the street. At first he thought she had dropped her books, but then he saw her fall to her knees and realized something much more serious had happened. Without thinking, he turned off the coffee machine he had been cleaning and rushed outside. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, kneeling down beside her. Kate looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and William felt something shift inside his chest. Her pain was so raw, so immediate, that he wanted to do whatever he could to help. My bracelet, she whispered, her voice breaking. It was my grandmother's. It broke and everything scattered. She gestured helplessly at the street around them. I can't lose it. I can't lose the last piece of her. William understood immediately. He had felt that same desperate panic when he thought he had lost his father's watch during the move to Millbrook. He knew the weight of objects that carried memories, the way they became more than just things when they connected you to people you loved. Without saying anything else, William began searching. He moved methodically, checking under cars, looking in the spaces between the storm drain grates, searching every crack in the asphalt. Other people began to stop and help when they saw what was happening. Mrs. Henderson came over with her dog, and soon there were 6 people crawling around the street, all looking for pieces of a broken bracelet that belonged to a young woman most of them barely knew. William found the first charm under Mrs. Peterson's blue sedan. It was the small silver book, tarnished but unharmed. He held it up to show Kate, and for the first time since her bracelet had broken, she smiled. That smile did something to William that he hadn't experienced in years. It was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, and he realized he would search every inch of this town if it meant seeing that expression again. Thank you, Kate said, taking the charm from his palm. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sunshine. This one means so much to me. My grandmother and I used to read together every evening. She would always say that books were bridges between people, ways to understand hearts we might never otherwise know. William nodded, understanding more than Kate realized. His own grandmother had been his closest companion growing up, the only person who truly understood his quiet nature. She had owned a small bookstore in Chinatown, and William had spent countless hours there, surrounded by stories and the smell of jasmine tea. They continued searching together, moving in a careful pattern down the street. William noticed how methodical Kate was, how she checked every possible hiding place twice, never giving up hope. Her determination reminded him of his grandmother's stubbornness when it came to finding the perfect book for a customer, never settling until the match was exactly right. Mrs. Henderson's golden retriever Murphy suddenly started pawing at something near the library steps. Kate hurried over and found the heart charm, the one that represented all the love her grandmother had poured into raising her. This charm was slightly bent, but the damage seemed to give it character, rather than diminish its beauty. 2 down, William said quietly, and Kate realized that somewhere in the last 20 minutes this stranger had become a partner in something that felt incredibly important. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held a kindness that made her feel safe. There was something careful about the way he moved, as if he understood that the world was full of fragile things that needed protection. The star charm proved more elusive. They searched for another 30 minutes, expanding their search area to include the sidewalks and the small garden area in front of the library. Kate was beginning to lose hope when William disappeared around the corner of the building. She heard him call her name, and when she found him, he was lying flat on his stomach, reaching under a parked motorcycle. I think I see something, he said, his voice slightly muffled. Kate knelt beside him, watching as he carefully maneuvered his arm into the small space. When he pulled back, he was holding the star charm, covered in dust, but intact. Kate took the charm from him, and this time she didn't let go of his hand right away. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You don't even know me, but you've spent your morning crawling around in the street looking for pieces of my bracelet. William looked down at their joined hands and realized he didn't want to let go either. Sometimes the most important things we do are for people we don't know yet, he said. And besides, I have a feeling I'd like to know you, if you'd be interested in that. The broken chain pieces were easier to find since they were larger. They located both sections quickly, and Kate gathered all the pieces of her bracelet into a small cloth bag she kept in her purse. The physical bracelet was broken, but somehow, sitting on the library steps with this gentle stranger, Kate felt more connected to her grandmother's memory than she had in months. I should probably get inside, Kate said reluctantly. The children will be arriving for story time soon, and I haven't even set up yet. She paused, then added, Would you like to come in? I mean, if you don't have to get back to your shop. Right away? William glanced across the street at Bean there where he could see through the window that several customers were waiting outside the locked door. He had never closed his shop during business hours before, had never put his own interests ahead of his responsibilities. But something about Kate made him want to be spontaneous, made him want to see what story time looked like through her eyes. "I should probably open," he said, then surprised himself by adding, "But maybe I could stop by later, when you're not working." Kate felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the morning's stress. "I'd like that. The library closes at 6 on weekdays. I usually stay until about 6:30 doing paperwork and straightening up." They stood up together, and William noticed that Kate moved with a natural grace, even after spending an hour searching on her hands and knees in the street. She brushed the dust off her skirt and picked up the book she had dropped earlier, somehow managing to look put together despite everything that had happened. "Kate," William said as she turned to go inside. She looked back at him, and he felt that same nervous flutter he remembered from high school. "I'm William, by the way. William Chen. I run the coffee shop across the street." "I know," Kate said with a shy smile. "I've been wanting to try your coffee for months. I guess I was just waiting for the right excuse." As Kate disappeared inside the library, William stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking down at his dust-covered hands. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this energized, this hopeful about something as simple as seeing someone again in a few hours. He walked back across the street to his shop, where Mrs. Kim and 2 other regular customers were waiting patiently by the door. "Sorry about that," he said as he unlocked the entrance. There was an emergency across the street. Mrs. Kim, who had lived in Millbrook for 60 years and knew everything about everyone, smiled knowingly. "Ah, you helped the librarian find her bracelet. Murphy told me all about it." She gestured to Mrs. Henderson's dog, who had apparently followed William back across the street and was now sitting hopefully by the coffee shop door. As William prepared Mrs. Kim's usual cappuccino, he found himself glancing across the street every few minutes. Through the library windows, he could see Kate setting up chairs in a circle, arranging books on a small table, transforming the space into something magical for the children who would arrive soon. He realized he was already counting the hours until 6:30, already planning what he would say when he knocked on the library door after closing time. The rest of Kate's day passed in a strange, dreamlike state. During story time, she found herself touching the small cloth bag in her pocket where the broken pieces of her bracelet rested. The children noticed nothing different about her reading of The Rainbow Fish, but Kate felt as if every word about sharing and friendship carried extra meaning. 8-year-old Lucy Martinez, who came to every story time with her baby brother, asked Kate why she looked so happy. "Sometimes unexpected things happen that turn out to be gifts," Kate told the little girl as they worked on their craft project, making friendship bracelets out of colorful embroidery thread. "Today I learned that there are still people in the world who will stop everything to help a stranger." Lucy nodded seriously, as if this was very important information, then went back to carefully braiding pink and purple threads together. Kate watched the children's small hands working to create something beautiful, and she thought about William's hands reaching under cars and motorcycles, searching for pieces of her past. Across the street, William was having his own unusual day. He found himself making mistakes he never made, accidentally giving Mrs. Thompson decaf instead of regular coffee, forgetting to charge Mr. Peterson for his blueberry muffin, putting sugar in drinks for customers who always ordered them plain. His regular customers began to notice his distraction, and more than a few of them glanced curiously toward the library windows. "You know," said Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store next door, "Kate Morrison is a lovely young woman. Been through a lot, that girl, but she's got a good heart. Her grandmother raised her right." Tom had a way of offering information without actually interfering, and William appreciated the subtle endorsement. As the afternoon wore on, William began to worry that he had misunderstood Kate's invitation. Maybe she was just being polite when she said he could stop by after work. Maybe she didn't really want to see him again, and he would just be bothering her by showing up at the library. These thoughts circled through his mind as he cleaned the espresso machine and wiped down tables, preparing to close for the day. At 6 o'clock sharp, Kate turned the open sign to closed and began her end-of-day routine, She reshelved the books that had been returned, straightened the children's area where story time had taken place, and organized the craft supplies for next week's activity. But every few minutes she found herself looking toward the front windows, watching for any sign of William across the street. She pulled the bag of broken bracelet pieces from her pocket and spread them out on the circulation desk. In the afternoon light streaming through the library windows, the charms looked somehow different than they had that morning. The star seemed to shine brighter, as if it had absorbed some of the hope from the day's events. The heart looked less bent and more like it had found a new shape that was just as meaningful as the original. The book charm caught the light and seemed to whisper stories about new chapters and unexpected beginnings. Kate had been thinking all day about how to fix the bracelet. The chain was clearly broken beyond simple repair, and she worried that trying to mend it might make it worse. But as she looked at the pieces now, she wondered if being broken might not be the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. At 6:25, Kate saw William lock the door of his coffee shop and walk across the street toward the library. Her heart began beating faster, and she quickly gathered up the bracelet pieces, not wanting him to think she was obsessing over them. When he knocked gently on the glass door, she felt that same flutter of nervous excitement she had experienced that morning. "Hi," William said when she opened the door. He was holding 2 cups of coffee and what looked like a small paper bag. "I brought you something. I brought you coffee, and then I brought you something else too." He seemed as nervous as she felt, which somehow made Kate feel more comfortable. "Come in," Kate said, stepping aside to let him into the quiet library. With all the lights on and no patrons around, the space felt intimate and peaceful. The smell of books mixed with the aroma of William's coffee, creating something that felt like the beginning of a perfect evening. "This is beautiful," William said, looking around at the carefully arranged displays and cozy reading nooks Kate had created throughout the library. "It feels like a place where stories come alive." Kate felt a warm glow at his appreciation. She had worked hard to make the library feel welcoming and magical, especially for the children who visited. "My grandmother always said that libraries are where lonely people come to remember they're not alone," she said. "I try to make it feel like a place where everyone belongs." They sat at one of the small tables in the children's section, surrounded by colorful books and the artwork that young patrons had created during various library programs. William handed Kate one of the coffee cups, and she took a sip of the most perfectly balanced latte she had ever tasted. "This is incredible," she said, and William smiled with genuine pleasure at her praise. "I've been experimenting with different roasts," he said. "I wanted to find something that would taste like comfort, if comfort had a flavor." Kate thought that was exactly what his coffee tasted like: warm, reassuring, and somehow familiar, even though she had never had anything quite like it. "You said you brought something else?" Kate asked, noticing that William was fidgeting with the small paper bag. William took a deep breath, suddenly looking uncertain. "I hope this isn't overstepping," he said. "But after you left this morning, I couldn't stop thinking about your bracelet, about how much it meant to you." He opened the paper bag and carefully pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have a friend who's a jeweler. I called him and described what happened, and he said he might be able to help." Kate felt her breath catch. "William, you didn't have to do that." "I know," he said quietly, "but I wanted to. Actually, I needed to. When I saw how upset you were this morning, when I saw what that bracelet meant to you, I realized that I wanted to be the kind of person who does something when someone is hurting. I wanted to matter, even to someone I had just met." Inside the velvet pouch was a delicate silver chain, slightly different from the original but clearly chosen with care. It was a bit longer than the old chain had been, with tiny reinforcements at the clasp that would prevent future breaks. Attached to the chain was a small gift card for the jewelry store, with a note that read, "For repairs, modifications, or anything else your bracelet might need." No expiration date. Kate stared at the chain and the gift card, feeling tears prick at her eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness like she had cried that morning. These were tears of amazement at the kindness of someone who barely knew her, but had taken the time to try to fix something that couldn't be replaced. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" William was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Because you're not really a stranger," he said finally. "I've been watching you walk to work every morning for months, wishing I had the courage to introduce myself. I've seen you stop to pet Murphy, seen you smile at the children, seen you carry books like their precious cargo. I knew you were someone special long before I knew your name." Kate's hands trembled slightly as she pulled the broken bracelet pieces from her pocket and laid them on the table between them. In the soft library lighting, with William sitting across from her, the charms seemed to tell a different story than they had that morning. They no longer looked like fragments of something lost, but rather like the beginning of something being rebuilt. "Would you help me put it back together?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question carried more weight than just asking for assistance with jewelry repair. She was asking William to become part of her most treasured possession, to help restore something that connected her to the person who had loved her most in the world. William understood the significance of what she was asking. His own hands were gentle as he picked up the star charm, examining it closely. "Tell me about this one," he said, settling into the chair beside her rather than across from her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of coffee and soap that seemed to follow him. "My grandmother said I was her bright star," Kate began, watching as William carefully threaded the charm onto the new chain. "When I was little and had bad dreams, she would take me outside and show me the constellations. She said that no matter how dark things got, there was always light somewhere if you knew how to look for it." William nodded, his fingers working carefully with the delicate chain. "My grandmother used to say something similar. She said that stars were just distant suns, and that every person carried their own light inside them. She said the trick was learning how to let it shine." As William attached the heart charm, Kate found herself studying his face. There was a concentration in his expression that spoke of someone who understood the importance of getting things exactly right. His movements were deliberate and sure, but also reverent, as if he knew he was handling pieces of someone's heart. "This one is for love," Kate said, touching the heart charm gently. "Not just romantic love, but all the different kinds. The love she had for me, the love I had for her, the love we both had for books and stories and quiet Sunday mornings. Love is the hardest thing to rebuild when it breaks," William said softly, and Kate heard something in his voice that suggested he spoke from experience. She wanted to ask him about it, but something told her this wasn't the time. Instead, she watched as he secured the charm with the same careful attention he had given the star. When he picked up the book charm, Kate felt her throat tighten with emotion. This had always been her favorite, not because it was the most beautiful, but because it represented the thing that had connected her and her grandmother most deeply. "She taught me to read when I was 4, Kate said. "But more than that, she taught me that stories could be medicine. When I was sad about missing my parents, she would read me stories about children who found new families. When I was scared about starting school, she found books about brave little girls who faced their fears." William threaded the book charm onto the chain, positioning it carefully between the heart and the star. "Books saved me too," he said. "When I was younger, I was terribly shy. I felt like I didn't know how to connect with people. But in books, I found characters who felt the same way I did. They showed me that being quiet didn't mean being invisible." As William worked on securing the final charm, Kate realized that this moment felt more intimate than any first date she had ever been on. There was something about watching someone handle the physical pieces of your history with such care that created a kind of trust she had never experienced before. "There," William said, holding up the completed bracelet. The new chain was slightly longer than the original, which meant it would hang differently on Kate's wrist, but somehow it looked exactly right. The 3 charms caught the library lights and seemed to dance together, unified again but somehow transformed by their journey. Kate held out her wrist, and William carefully fastened the bracelet's new clasp. His fingers brushed against her skin and she felt a warmth spread up her arm. The bracelet felt familiar but new, like coming home to a place that had been redecorated in your absence. "It's perfect," Kate said, turning her wrist to admire how the bracelet caught the light. "More than perfect. It's like it was meant to be this way." "Maybe it was," William said, and when Kate looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Maybe sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be put back together the right way. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both looking at the bracelet, both aware that something significant had just happened between them. Kate felt connected not just to her grandmother's memory, but to this quiet, kind man who had spent his evening helping her rebuild something precious. "William," Kate said finally, "can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really move to Millbrook? I mean, you said you left the city, but there's something more, isn't there?" William was quiet for so long that Kate worried she had overstepped. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "I lost someone too," he said. "Not like you lost your grandmother. I lost someone because I was too afraid to tell them how I felt until it was too late. I spent 2 years watching this woman from across the office, finding excuses to walk past her desk hoping she might notice me. And when she finally left the company to move across the country, I realized I'd wasted every opportunity I had to be honest about what I was feeling." Kate felt her heart ache for him. "What was her name?" "Sarah," William said with a sad smile. "She was an architect, always sketching buildings in the margins of her meeting notes. She had this laugh that made everyone in the room smile, even if they didn't know what was funny." "Do you still love her?" William considered this question seriously. "I love the memory of her," he said. "But I think I loved the possibility of her more than I loved her actual person. I loved the idea of being brave enough to take a chance on something real." Kate understood. She had done the same thing with relationships, always holding back a piece of herself, always waiting for the perfect moment that never seemed to arrive. "Is that why you helped me today?" she asked. "Because you wanted to be brave this time?" William turned to look at her directly, and Kate saw honesty in his expression that took her breath away. "I helped you today because when I saw you crying in that street, something inside me broke too," he said. "And when you smiled at me after I found that first charm, I realized that maybe broken things could be fixed. Maybe second chances were real." Kate felt tears gathering in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of recognition. She was looking at someone who understood what it felt like to be scared of wanting something too much. Someone who knew what it was like to love carefully because losing hurt so deeply. Without thinking about it, Kate reached across the small space between them and took William's hand. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for fixing my bracelet, but for helping me fix something I didn't even know was broken inside me." "What's that?" William asked, his thumb gently stroking across her knuckles. "My faith that there are still good people in the world," Kate said. "People who care about strangers, who take time to help, who understand that small gestures can change everything." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Every morning, Kate would wave to William through the coffee shop window as she walked to work, and he would hold up a fresh cup of coffee, indicating that he was saving one for her. During her lunch break, she would cross the street to Bean There, where William would have already prepared her favorite lavender honey latte and whatever pastry he thought would pair perfectly with her mood. Their conversations during these lunch visits grew longer and more intimate. Kate learned that William had studied literature before switching to business, and that he still read poetry late at night when he couldn't sleep. William discovered that Kate wrote children's stories in her spare time, filling notebook after notebook with tales about brave little animals and magical libraries. "You should publish them," William said one Tuesday afternoon as Kate described a story she was working about a mouse who lived in a bookstore and helped children find exactly the books they needed. They were sitting at his favorite corner table, the one that offered the best view of both the library and the small town square. Kate shook her head, touching her grandmother's bracelet unconsciously. It had become a habit over the past weeks, this gentle gesture whenever she felt uncertain or emotional. "They're just for me," she said. "A way to process things, I guess. My grandmother always said writing was like prayer, a way of having conversations with the parts of yourself you didn't know how to reach." "Maybe," William said thoughtfully. "But prayer is meant to be shared sometimes, too. Your stories could help other children the way books helped you when you were little." Kate had never thought about her writing that way before. She had always assumed her stories were too simple, too personal, too much like the kinds of tales her grandmother used to tell her during thunderstorms. But listening to William speak about them with such respect made her wonder if maybe there was value in simplicity, beauty in the personal touch. Their friendship was deepening into something neither of them had expected. William found himself looking forward to Kate's visits with an intensity that surprised him. She brought light into his carefully ordered world. But more than that, she brought possibility. For the first time since moving to Millbrook, he began thinking about the future in terms of we, instead of I. Kate was experiencing her own transformation. The grief that had shadowed her for years was still there, but it no longer felt like a weight she carried alone. Sharing stories about her grandmother with William had somehow made those memories feel more alive, more present. Instead of feeling like she was holding on to the past, she felt like she was building a bridge between then and now, One Thursday evening, after the library had closed, William appeared at the door with a picnic basket and a blanket. "I have an idea," he said when Kate let him in. "But you'll have to trust me." Kate had learned to trust William completely over the past month. He had proven himself to be exactly the kind of person he appeared to be: thoughtful, reliable, gentle with fragile things. "Where are we going?" "The roof," William said with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. "I've been working on getting access to the building's roof for weeks. Mrs. Patterson finally said yes if we promised to be careful." Kate followed. William up the narrow staircase she had never noticed before, through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and out onto the flat roof of the library building. The view took her breath away. From up there she could see all of Millbrook spread out below them. The coffee shop where William had spent so many hours learning her favorite drinks, the school where the children who attended her story time spent their days, the park where she sometimes walked on weekend afternoons, trying to imagine her life in a different place. But it was the sky that made Kate gasp. October in Millbrook meant clear nights and brilliant stars, more visible than they had ever been from the ground. William spread the blanket near the edge of the roof and unpacked sandwiches, thermos of hot chocolate, and a small telescope that Kate hadn't noticed in the basket. "My grandmother would have loved this," Kate said, settling beside William on the blanket. The bracelet on her wrist caught the moonlight, and she thought about all the nights she had spent looking at stars with the woman who raised her. "Tell me about her," William said, adjusting the telescope's focus. "I know she gave you the bracelet and taught you to love books, but what was she really like?" Kate wrapped her arms around her knees and looked up at the constellation Orion, bright and clear in the autumn sky. "She was stubborn," she said with a laugh, "absolutely determined that I would grow up believing in magic, even after everything terrible that had happened to me. She never let me feel sorry for myself for very long, but she also never minimized my pain." "What kind of magic did she believe in?" William asked, genuinely curious. "The everyday kind," Kate said. "She believed that making someone smile was magic, that finding the perfect book for someone was magic, that making cookies on a rainy day and reading stories out loud was the most powerful magic there was." William thought about this as he peered through the telescope, adjusting it to bring Jupiter into focus. "I think she was right," he said finally. "What you do at the library, the way you make children feel welcome and important, that's magic. What you did for me, just by being kind to a stranger who was too nervous to introduce himself properly, that was magic too." Kate felt her heart flutter at his words. Over the past weeks she had begun to suspect that her feelings for William were deepening beyond friendship, but she had been afraid to examine those feelings too closely. She had never been good at relationships, always too cautious, always too afraid of loss to fully invest in love. "Can I tell you something?" Kate said, accepting the cup of hot chocolate William poured for her from the thermos. "Always." "I've been scared," she said, "not of you but of this, of feeling close to someone again. After my grandmother died, I promised myself I would be more careful about caring too much. It hurt so badly to lose her, and I didn't think I could survive that kind of pain again." William set down his own cup and turned to face her fully. "Kate, you don't have to be afraid with me. I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that," Kate said softly. "Nobody can promise that." "You're right," William said. "I can't promise I'll never die or that life will never separate us. But I can promise that I won't leave by choice. I can promise that whatever time we have, I want to spend it being honest about how I feel about you." Kate's breath caught. "How do you feel about me?" William reached for her hands, and Kate noticed that his were shaking slightly. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Actually, I know I am. I've been falling in love with you since the morning you cried over a broken bracelet and let me help you put the pieces back together." Kate felt tears spring to her eyes, but for once they were tears of pure happiness. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to be, but I am." They sat looking at each other under the stars, both amazed by the courage it had taken to speak those words out loud. Kate thought about her grandmother's belief in everyday magic, and realized that this feeling, this moment, was exactly what her grandmother had been talking about. William leaned forward slowly, giving Kate time to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. She wanted to meet him halfway, wanted to seal this declaration with the kind of kiss that felt like a promise, like the beginning of a new chapter in both their stories. When their lips met, Kate felt the bracelet on her wrist grow warm against her skin, as if her grandmother's love was wrapping around this new love, blessing it and welcoming it into the story that had begun with a broken chain and 3 scattered charms in the middle of Main Street. 6 months later, Kate stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the neckline of her pale blue dress and touching the bracelet on her wrist. Today was the day of the Spring Festival, an annual Millbrook tradition where local businesses and community organizations set up booths in the town square to celebrate the end of winter. Kate had volunteered to run the library's booth, where she would be reading stories and helping children make their own books. But today was special for another reason. Today, William was finally going to meet Kate's best friend Sarah from college, who was visiting for the weekend. Kate had told Sarah all about William in their weekly phone calls, but she was nervous about this meeting. Sarah had a way of seeing through people, and Kate wanted desperately for her to approve of the man who had become so important to her life. More than that, though Kate had begun to suspect that William was planning something special for today. He had been unusually secretive for the past week, disappearing for mysterious errands and having whispered phone conversations that stopped whenever she walked into the coffee shop. There was an energy about him, a barely contained excitement that made Kate wonder if her hopes about where their relationship was heading might be about to come true. The festival was in full swing when Kate arrived at the town square. Being there had a booth selling specialty drinks and homemade pastries, and Kate could see William behind the counter, preparing what looked like hundreds of cups of his signature festival blend. He caught her eye and waved, pointing to a large sign that read, "Kate's Favorites," above a display of lavender honey lattes and the chocolate croissants she had become addicted to over the winter. "He's got it bad," said a voice behind her, and Kate turned to find her friend Sarah grinning at the display. Sarah had driven in from the city that morning, and Kate felt a rush of relief at seeing her familiar face. "What do you think so far?" Kate asked, gesturing toward William, who was now expertly managing 3 espresso machines while chatting easily with customers. "I think," Sarah said, studying William's face as he worked, "that he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars personally. Also, he's completely gorgeous in a quiet, literary way that's exactly your type." Kate felt her cheeks flush. "We haven't talked about the future or anything serious yet," she said. "I mean, we've said we love each other, but we haven't discussed what that means long-term." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Kate Morrison, you have been planning your wedding to that man in your head since Christmas. Don't try to pretend you're being casual about this." Before Kate could deny this entirely accurate accusation, William appeared at her side, slightly out of breath from running across the square. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand to Kate's friend. "I've heard so much about you. Thank you for coming all this way." "Thank you for making Kate smile the way she used to in college," Sarah said, shaking his hand firmly. "I was beginning to think she had forgotten how." William glanced at Kate with such tenderness that she felt her heart skip. "She's taught me how to smile again, too," he said simply. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Kate's storytime booth was packed with children and parents, and she found herself reading tale after tale while William and Sarah worked together to help kids illustrate their own stories. Watching William interact with the children, Kate felt a deep warmth spread through her chest. He was patient and encouraging, treating each child's artistic efforts with the same serious attention he gave to crafting the perfect cup of coffee. "He's going to be an amazing father someday," Sarah murmured during a brief lull between story sessions. Kate's breath caught. She and William had never discussed children, but watching him carefully help 5-year-old Emma spell her name on the cover of her handmade book, Kate could suddenly picture their future with startling clarity. William reading bedtime stories in voices that made their children giggle, teaching them to make coffee and hot chocolate, showing them how to find constellations in the night sky. As the festival wound down in the early evening, William asked Kate if she would take a walk with him through the park behind the square. Sarah volunteered to help pack up the library's booth, winking at Kate in a way that suggested she suspected something was about to happen. The park was quiet after the noise and crowds of the festival. Spring in Millbrook was gentle and green, with dogwood trees blooming white and pink along the walking paths. Kate and William strolled hand in hand, both of them seeming unusually thoughtful. "Kate," William said as they reached the small pond at the center of the park, There's something I want to talk to you about." Kate felt her heart begin to race. William's voice held that same careful tone he had used the night he first told her he loved her, and she realized that her hands were shaking slightly. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. William stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Do you remember what you said that first night on the library roof? About being afraid to care too much because losing people hurt so badly?" Kate nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've been thinking about that a lot," William continued. "About how love always involves risk. How caring about someone means accepting that you might lose them. And I realize that the risk isn't what scares me anymore. What scares me is the thought of not taking the risk. Of looking back someday and realizing I was too afraid to ask for what I really wanted." William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that looked remarkably similar to the one that had held the jewelry store gift card all those months ago. "Kate, I want to spend the rest of my life helping you put broken things back together, and I want you to help me do the same. Will you marry me?" Kate stared at the box, then at William's face, then back at the box again. When he opened it, she saw a ring that took her breath away. It wasn't large or flashy, but it was perfect. A simple band with 3 small stones that sparkled in the evening light. As she looked more closely, she realized the stones were arranged to mirror her bracelet. A star-shaped diamond, a heart-shaped ruby, and a book-shaped sapphire. "William," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The jeweler helped me design it," William said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "He said it would remind you every day that our love story is connected to all the love that came before it, but that it's also something completely new." Kate looked down at her grandmother's bracelet, gleaming on her wrist in the fading sunlight. She thought about the morning it had broken, how devastated she had felt, how certain she had been that losing the bracelet meant losing her last connection to the woman who had raised her. She thought about William kneeling in the street, searching for pieces of her past, determined to help her rebuild something precious. Now she realized that her grandmother's love hadn't been contained in the bracelet at all. It had been living inside Kate all along, and William's love hadn't replaced it or diminished it. Instead, his love had helped her understand that her capacity for love was infinite, that loving William didn't mean loving her grandmother any less. "Yes," Kate said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." As William slipped the ring onto her finger, Kate felt the bracelet on her other wrist grow warm against her skin. She looked up at the evening stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and she could almost hear her grandmother's voice telling her that this was exactly the kind of everyday magic she had always believed in. The ring fit perfectly, and as Kate admired it sparkling next to her repaired bracelet, she realized that broken things could indeed be made more beautiful than they had been originally. Sometimes the cracks where things had been mended became the most precious parts, the places where new love could grow and flourish. 2 years later, on their wedding day, Kate would add one more charm to her grandmother's bracelet, a tiny silver infinity symbol that William gave her as a wedding gift. And 40 years after that, she would pass the bracelet down to her own granddaughter, along with the story of how love could be found in the most unexpected places, how broken hearts could be mended by gentle hands, and how sometimes the most important promises were made not with words, but with the simple act of kneeling down to help a stranger gather the scattered pieces of something precious. But that night in the park, with her new engagement ring catching the moonlight and William's arms around her, Kate simply stood still and marveled at the way her life had transformed since that morning her bracelet fell apart. She had thought that day was about loss, but it had really been about the beginning of something beautiful, something that would grow stronger with each passing year, something that would last long after the stars they were looking at had burned out, and new ones had taken their place in the endless, hopeful sky.